Hey guys, it's Kobi McCoull and welcome back to another episode. In today's video I'm going to be breaking down a cover that I just posted recently of Juice WRLD and the Kid Laroi's track Go.
Go, go, go. She always be talking like she no. I told her don't ever leave me low. I guess I'm accident.
If you haven't seen the cover yet, please do go check it out. I really hope that you guys enjoy it. And without further ado, let's just jump straight into this breakdown.
I guess I'm accident.
Now, there were so many things that went really well in this, and there were also so many things that I really had to wrestle with because I'm constantly learning as I go with all of this. My overall goal was to use this to learn as much as I could and to try and follow along with their original track, just to analyze every detail and see all the different things that I could pick up from it. On first listen, it seems like it's not too complicated, but they don't have to sound complicated to actually have lots of fine details that really make all the difference. So the best place to start is with the guitar. It was actually really challenging for me to get a sound that I was happy with from the guitar because I'm using this Pacifica. It's a second-hand thing, really doesn't sound that good, and it really struggles staying in tune all the way up and down the neck. But it was better than nothing, and I just have to work with what I've got. What I actually ended up doing was like breaking it down into the individual chords, put the capo on the frets, and then tuned the notes as they were, which I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to do, but that's what I had to do. And so then within the project here, you can see all the different sections that there were. Now here's what my raw guitar tone sounded like, and I just recorded this in through a DI, and I definitely want to explore other ways of recording the guitar because I think it could definitely be improved massively. It was very much all over the place, and part of that was just down to me not being as skillful as I'd like to be at playing, but then part of it was also just down to the guitar really not being a very good guitar. I then had to run it through a variety of different processing. So what you can see here is I have my main guitar, I have a second guitar which just provides the same loop on the left and right sides just to make it a bit thicker. Then I have chords which come in the thicker parts or the more luscious parts of the beat that just sound like this. And actually, those ones sounded alright. It was quite nice the way that they came out from the guitar, at least compared to the original loop that I had. Then also just some other little licks that I added on top. All of these things that I put in were just what I heard was in the original track, and so if you follow through the original track you'll actually see that they're almost identical what I did, because that was my goal, was to try and replicate it as best as I could. With the actual processing I just used a lot of EQ, and I had to mess around and duck out some horrible frequencies, and then also just added some compression. I was also experimenting with the Kyle Beats plugin Drip, which I didn't use on that part of the guitar channel, but I did use on the final guitar bus. It just made everything gel together nicer and made it feel a little bit less blippy and a little bit more vintage. Then I also used an imager, which in the smaller parts I turned off with an automation clip so that it was in the center, and then in the bigger parts I turned it on so that it was wider during those sections, and so that it also made room for the vocal within the middle. So you can hear there it's in the middle, whereas around here it's a way out wider around your earphones. I went back and forth I don't know how many times between different tones and having different EQs, making it brighter, making it darker, and one of the main things I realized is that the higher quality your input tone is, the less of a nightmare it can be trying to actually put it all together and make it sound really good. So I will definitely be looking to try and get a better guitar in the future, I think, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens. So that was the guitar, and the next thing that I led onto were the drums. If you listen back to the other track, maybe compare mine side by side, feel free to be as critical as you would like. The kick is slightly different. My kick was a little bit more mellow, but I was happy with that. I didn't want to spend ages looking for a kick that was the same, but the clap, murder clap trap snare, which I got from Splice, and it sounds identical to the original. Now, that's it. That was what the drum beat was. It was relatively simple, but the kick pattern changes every now and again. The clap runs all the way through doing exactly the same thing, and then the hats run all the way through doing more or less exactly the same thing. Then also they have rides. As it's coming up to this section, it just adds a kind of bounce to the track that goes along with the rest of the drums. And that was it. The drums were actually a very simple part, and as I was getting bogged down and focusing on everything else to do with the guitar and the vocals and trying to mix all of those together, I didn't even add any compression or anything like that to the drums that I usually would, and they actually ended up sounding alright because the original samples themselves were high quality. Then I just added in an 808. And obviously I just got it to follow the same bass note patterns. I didn't actually use any sidechain compression for that either. All I did within the bass sample was I put the delay up ever so slightly so that it doesn't happen straight away, just so that the sample is just slightly offbeat, but it actually just seemed to work pretty well with the kick. So it sounds like this altogether. I could get it very similar in terms of structurally and melodically, but it was the tone with the guitar that I just really struggled with overall. But it was a really helpful challenge. Now, in the FLP that you guys can download, there will be a bunch of WAV files that have been consolidated, which is just to help my CPU cope with everything that it's being asked to do. But I will keep underneath the MIDI files so that you can see what the notes were, and I did my best to try and replicate the patterns as closely as I could. So the strings, I just used a free VST, the Spitfire Audio Labs, and I did what I could with that free VST to try and reproduce the original string sample, but I was never going to manage to get something that sounded quite as rich and as luscious as the original one, because I think it may well have been recorded with some actual strings, and if it wasn't, it would have been done with a really high quality VST that I'm pretty certain wouldn't be free. So they're just subtle along with the chorus. It just adds a bit of volume, but then at the very end they're much more grand, and they come in with this sort of Reese bass. So the Reese bass just sounds like a standard Reese bass, but I just had to make sure it wasn't too big. And it was quite challenging mixing the Reese bass together with the strings, because the original string sound is this massive luscious noise. So I cut it down there so that it sounded like that overall, and then I automated the volume up as well, and then obviously the bass comes in with it. But because there was so much going on in the high end with the strings, they would just completely crowd out the guitar, and because the guitar was also challenging to mix as well, it was really quite difficult to try and get them to sit together properly. So in that instance, the guitar kind of feels like it's sitting on top of everything. They don't feel like they properly gel together the way that it does in the original song. But having a higher quality sample of strings and guitar would definitely contribute to that, because they'd be easier to EQ and separate and create space for each of them to sit. All the little details that I noticed within the instrumental, like the little guitar licks and the things being panned to the side and the chords being played together, all of those can kind of go unnoticed unless you're actually using your ear to try and realize what's being done and how it's being done. That is one of the reasons why doing this type of exercise can be really helpful, because it can show you your ears aren't necessarily hearing what they think they're hearing. And so by paying a bit more attention, you tune your musical or producing ear into what's actually going on. And now I hear the song totally differently to the way that I heard it when I originally listened to it for the first time. But where the attention to detail really came in was actually with the vocal, because although it just seems like it's the Kid Laroi singing on top of it with this kind of really rich and raspy voice, and that's all that's going on, there's actually loads of other layers that are going on underneath and things that fill it out, because the instrumental on its own can actually seem quite bare and simple. But that's actually very desirable, so that you've got space to add in more creativeness with a vocal vocal more character and personality. So I also wanted to kind of test the singing style and see what kind of differences I could learn from the way that the Kid Laroi sang it and also Juice WRLD. Just the actual art of singing in that kind of style itself was really interesting to explore. There's so many things that work incredibly well because of the way that he sings. For example, in the bit where he says, "I guess I'm accident prone," he slides it so nicely, and there's lots of kind of natural compression that comes from his original vocal anyway. So instead of just going, "I guess I'm accident," he goes, "I guess," and see the way I said guess there, it's like, "I guess I'm accident prone." It's got a very natural compressed sound to it before it's even gone through a compressor or any EQ. And so it's amazing how much you can shape the style of a vocal just by the way that you actually sing it before anything else goes on in the DAW. Then what I also realized is that although it can seem like he often will slur his words and, for example, "she always be talking," it's not "she always be talking," it's "she always be talking like she no. There's a large difference between just slurring all of your words and choosing specific words to slur. Lots of the pronunciation is done really well. In his verse where he's saying, "I don't know no better," he pronounces that really well, and then stylistically chooses other words to not pronounce properly to add more style to it. So as you can see, I have the main vocal here.
Don't ever leave me low. I guess I'm accident prone. I don't know no better.
So I have my vocal chain here, but I've had to turn it all off because I wouldn't be able to screen record and show you guys what was going on with the actual vocal. So I recorded in the vocals, but then I cut them all up because it's so significant the way it feels relative to the beat. And so even if I sang it as best as I could, there would still be little bits where if I just moved it a tiny bit to the left or a tiny bit to the right, the feel of it would be drastically different. In the same way that hi-hats have that rhythmic power, vocals also have that rhythmic power tremendously, and that's something that the Kid Laroi does really well throughout the whole song, whether he sang it like that or whether the producer that would then have cut up his vocal and processed it did the same thing, so that it all really bounces with the track really effectively. And then I ran it through just an EQ, but I had some real trouble with this area kind of between 100 and 300 hertz. So I had a couple of resonant frequencies that were kind of challenging to deal with, but I am just working out in my bedroom, so it's not the easiest thing to get perfect signal, but I was still relatively happy with the result. And then I just ran it through a de-esser just to control some of the sibilants, but I also went through the original sample and turned down or replaced a lot of the breaths and the S's just so that it was more pleasant to listen to. Then just ran it through some relatively mild compression, and then ran it through some much harder compression, some other EQ, and then some excitement here, before running it through Little Altar Boy just to add a little bit of saturation with the drive knob here. Then sent that main vocal to one type of hall reverb, a plate reverb, and a half delay. Then I just bust all of those together so that I can control them all here and with the final mix down. And then just had a left-right signal just to try and thicken out the vocal.
Go. She always be talking like she no.
And I just panned them hard left and hard right just to make the vocal thicker in the sections where I wanted it to be thicker. Then I also added in some harmonies.
Go. She always be talking like she no.
And I actually processed them with like Little Altar Boy and New Tone just to try and flatten them out and make them almost kind of robotic, because it adds these kind of nice, almost distorted overtones to the top of the signal just to try and make it a little bit more luscious. And then underneath the whole thing, this is another example of the things that you don't necessarily notice, he has him just singing like yo, no, all the way through. And it all sounds a little bit weird and messy underneath. When you put it all together, it actually blends pretty well.
You're really good at fucking with me, girl, I gave it to you. But I'm out here doing this for me and not for you. I done fucked around and got attached, damn, I'm so with you. I don't know what to do, I don't know how to slide for you. And that's my biggest problem in denial. Go. She always be talking like she no. I told her don't ever leave me low. I guess I'm accident prone. Go. She always.
And then there's just even more layers in the final chorus.
Go. She always be talking like she no. I told her don't ever leave me low. I guess I'm accident prone.
I had to do a lot of organization in order to try and keep in control of all of that, otherwise it would end up like a massive wash. He also added in these kind of cool little ad-libs underneath that, unless you pay attention to them, you don't necessarily notice, but they do a massive amount of adding character to the track.
I don't know no better. I just wanna get into this, and I was one more better. You fuck with my brain, you don't know no better. Yeah, wish I knew you better. Shit, but I don't know no better. So I keep doing what I know best. Yeah.
And yeah, my overall time on this, I think, was about 48 or 50 hours. Because I was just experimenting with so many different things and really trying to use the whole project to learn. It wasn't just about trying to create a final product and then have it be done with. I was like, okay, what happens if I put the compressor before the de-esser, or if I put this here or that there, or if I send the guitar to this channel, then this channel. And there was so much that I learned about so much of the process. So I would really recommend doing this kind of exercise if you want to try and improve. And like I say, you guys can download the FLP if you want to explore what I did, but I'm going to simplify quite a lot of it so that you guys can actually use it, and it'll just be the stock plugins. But if you guys have any problems with the FLP, or even if you just have any questions about it, then please do let me know, and I'd be happy to connect with you. So here are the final conclusions and the most important lessons I learned from all of this. One being that initial style, tone, and quality is massively important. It just makes everything else downstream much more efficient and much easier. Essentially, you just don't want to be polishing a turd. The second being that details make a massive difference, because although something can seem simple on the surface, when you dive in and really analyze what's going on, there can be a lot more going on there, but because it's done so well, it seems quite discreet. The third being, it's better to have space that you can fill with other ideas and styles than to have too much going on and be trying to cut everything out and control a massive mess. And the fourth and final one, which has been a really interesting challenge for me throughout all of this, because I've wanted to try and get it as good as I possibly can, is to not hang around too much on a project or an idea and find yourself stuck not making any progress. Because ultimately the best progress seems to come from iteration, consistent movement, and then good quality rest, so that you can then come back to the next thing fresh with all the lessons that you learned. So as tempting as it is to keep tweaking things and try and get something else, sometimes it's best to take the lessons you have and move on to the next thing. So that was that. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video and the cover. If you have any questions, please do leave them down below or send me a message on Instagram. I look forward to sharing the next video with you. But until then, bye.
Go, go, go. She always be talking like she know. I told her don't ever leave me low. I guess I'm accident. Prom.